the company that I'm with. So I'm Corey Marcel. I'm Director of Sales of Docebo. So who is Docebo? We're a global organization. We're a learning management system, but we're also a lot more than that. We feel like we provide the only complete picture of the learner to the administration, to the people that are admitting the LMS. We provide both a look at their formal training as well as how they're participating socially, again, to give you the full picture of who the learner is and what they're interested in and where they need help. So with that, we have 4 offices globally, over 140 employees now, and gaining rapidly, and we've got clients, over 1,100 of them in over 80 countries, 33 different languages. So a lot of fun, different, varied industries and companies that we work with, and I'm excited to be with you here today. So with that, I'd like to introduce my talented co-host and dynamic co-host here, Mr. John Lay, the CEO and lead analyst of Talented Learning. John, I'll let you take away the rest of your introduction there.
All right. Thanks, Corey, and thanks, Docebo, for hosting me today. It's great to be here and to share some experience and some best practices learned throughout a career here in learning management systems. So as Corey said, I'm the CEO of Talented Learning. We'll get into who they are in just one second, but I spend my time as an author and a blogger and a lot of time presenting, but primarily I consult with clients on how to buy and buying learning management systems and the best approach and practice to take. The reason I'm qualified to talk about that and to present here today and to offer some insider guides and tips is I now have about $65 million of frontline experience of either selling or buying learning management systems or helping my clients buy learning management systems throughout a career, including about 13 years of selling high-end learning management systems. And so it was really through that experience of learning what to do and probably more importantly, learning what not to do, that I started to assemble these tips over the course of my career and what we'll share with you today. Throughout the whole time that I was selling, one of the things that I like to focus on in my career was working on extended enterprise LMS opportunities, and those were learning technology not for your employees but for your customers or for your partners and channel partners or association members. And I developed my own specialty in that over the years. But during all my years of selling, what I never really noticed was anybody speaking about extended enterprise or learning management specific topics. And so 4 years ago, almost to the day here, we started Talented Learning, co-founded Talented Learning, self-funded it to be an independent analyst of the learning technology space, and particularly with learning management systems dedicated towards extended enterprise. To that end, I personally now have reviewed 130 different learning management systems, 125 on the slide, but 130 in the last in the last 4 years. And with each one of those, I do everything from speak to executives to their customers to getting in-depth demonstrations and even test driving the application by myself. And so over here at Talented Learning, we've assembled a huge database of these vendors and the capabilities, and we continually release our research for both free and for a fee-based period. And so that research is really the basis and the backbone here of what we're going to show you today. And our agenda for today is we're really excited to give you an update, one on the LMS market and what's changed. So all that research, 130 vendors, dozens of organizations buying learning management systems. I take to all that and factored in what is different about the learning marketplace in 2017 than it has been in other years. And it's pretty significant. And then we're going to go through 10 insider tips of things that all the way from the very beginning of the process to the very end of the process of selection, and give you some practical advice you won't see elsewhere. We'll talk about resources along the way. We've got lots of polls integrated into today so that we can make this interactive. Please ask questions. We're going to stop periodically. And for any of you that have been on one of my webinars before, you'll know that this is going to be a fast-paced and info-packed session. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it. Got our popcorn. I'm going to go ahead and shut off my smiling face now so we can see the slides. And plus, that's that's enough torture for anybody, just the first couple of minutes there. So we'll get going. So let's start off with a getting to know you slide. And boy, we had hundreds and hundreds of people from just every corner of the world today log into or register for the system. And so it's always interesting to see who shows up here at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So
looks like a lot of people in training so far, followed closely by IT. A lot of channel sales in here.
oh, all right, a little customer service, just a little bit of customer service. Cool, everybody, keep voting here. We'll leave this open for just 1 second.
Yeah.
But it's nice. Got a nice training crowd inside training employees. That's wonderful. Let me share some results here, and we'll see how that looks. So not so shabby. 64% training. So I got a nice mix here of training folks, and we'll make sure we take that into account. So let's go ahead and look at the next one here. So which of these best describe you? Are you an LMS user, LMS administrator? You write the checks for your LMS? You don't know what LMS spells?
Right. You're just here to find out what LMS means, right?
Here is other. We got lots of others. Let's see what we got in the chat here. Where are they coming from? Questions. Yeah, you can chat it to us in the box, or you put it in the question pane.
Yeah, very interesting. The other categories pretty popular.
Other categories popular. Learning professionals looking to learn. Wonderful. All right, so we'll go ahead and share that result out. And you see, most of us, or a lot of us, almost a majority of us are LMS administrators, and that's great because you're experienced using systems. You know what an LMS is, and probably almost as well as us, you know the pitfalls that you may have encountered here on the potentially on your first selection. So good. So we'll get going. So after reviewing all the LMSs and just focusing here in the industry, we sit down every year in December, and we say, what did we learn, and what's different, and how can we communicate that about the industry as a whole? And after being in the industry for 20 years, it was really easy to stay on top of the industry for a long time because it didn't change for decades. It was really the same, but that's not the case anymore. The industry is so quickly evolving and changing, and we're going to talk about 5 reasons why, 5 trends that we see happening right now, and then how that impacts on the selection of an LMS. And these new changes are really what you need to focus on or help focus on to make smart selections in the process. And so you hear a lot in the industry. For the last 10 years, I've been hearing about how the LMS is dying, or the LMS is dead, or we're waiting for the next thing past the LMS. Well, the LMS isn't dying. The LMS isn't going anywhere. The LMS is here to stay. In all my years now of following the industry, it's stronger than ever because there's always going to be a measurable need to bring learners and content together. And that's been true for the beginning when it was just about compliance, and then as it moved into talent development, and now really as it's into productivity and to really extended enterprises and becoming a profit center inside an organization instead of a cost center. There's more LMS vendors, there's broader base of technology, there's more business applications supported by learning management systems now in 2017 than there has ever been in the industry. And in fact, there's almost 700 different learning management systems out there. But when people say that LMSs are dying, I think what they're saying is that LMS buyers and users are somewhat fed up and tired of the big, bulky, expensive, hard-to-use applications. Just yesterday, I got a phone call from or an email from an organization that you would all recognize, when they were asking me, how many people can actually load content, and they currently have 123 people that can load content in the application, but they can't allow it because there's just so many problems just to train those people to to use the application. And so just that difficulty of using it is challenging. But so what happens is that the large scale market, the large corporate market and the large academic market, primarily the large corporate market, has had LMSs now for going on to our third decade, and it's difficult to manage a global organization with lots of languages and business units and organizations and content libraries and different regulatory rules and regulations in different parts of the country and states and provinces. And then you add to the fact that these LMSs inside these big global corporations are integrated into talent management suites that include broader HR capabilities and then also financial and ERP capabilities. And what you have is that LMSs in the large scale market are really woven into the cultural and the technical ecosystem of these organizations. And they're expensive to replace. And as a result, there's not a lot of whole lot of innovation that's happening in the large scale market. And there's not a whole frequency or a high frequency of turnovers of learning management systems. They tend to be in there, once they get in there, they tend to be in there for lots of years. And so why this is relevant is that the innovation is happening everywhere but the large scale market. And really, this is really where the cloud comes into play, because the cloud saved the day. So for decades, we've had 10 to 12 learning management systems that were, they changed names and they merged and they acquired, but they were always the same ones for many, many years. And then about 5 to 8 years ago, the cloud was born and the cloud learning management systems were born. And learning management systems went from very expensive to moderated in cost. They went from long implementation cycles to shorter, sometimes even instant access or instant setup of a domain or a portal. They went from organizations used to have high IT involvement to now having very low IT involvement, if any, because everything's in the cloud. The technical issues are solved. And integrations went from being $10,000 or $15,000 to do a custom integration to now checking a box and being able to have integrations to one or many systems. And what this is translated to is from a very high barrier of entry for both vendors to come into the marketplace and for buyers to come into the marketplace to now being a very, very low barrier of entry. And that any organization with one person, with 5 people or 10 people or 100 can get into learning management and can get into it in a reasonable way without mortgaging the company or the house, so to speak. And so because of this cloud LMSs, what ended up happening is that we've now had the introduction of specialists into the marketplace. And previously, LMS companies all tried to be everything to everybody for every business use in every language in every industry. And it was really important to be as broad and as big and as complex as you possibly could to handle every scenario simultaneously. But now it's about being the best in a particular category, of chasing either after a segment of the market, like small or medium enterprise, or going after an industry, or after a business use or a type of audience. And that's where all the LMSs are coming from. A lot of them don't even like to call themselves learning management systems because they differentiate on so many different ways. And they differentiate on the learning audience, the function, how they price, the models, the implementation that they have, the productized integrations, what industry they're at, and they even have active executive selling and involvement. The owners and the executives even tend to be an active, visible part of the company. And so it's these specialists now that compete in the marketplace, and the specialists are really what provides the opportunity. And the last trend here, I'll take a breath here, I cut Corey out of the conversation, is just this the rise. We'll get him back in, folks, I promise. Is just the rise of extended enterprise learning. So because of this, because of that low barrier entry and the specialist nature and focusing after use cases, what's happened is lots and lots of organizations now target extended enterprise, either e-commerce, the sale of content, or using content to support your business lines, providing complementary content to your business lines, teaching your customers how to use your product more effectively and complementary products, teaching your resellers how to sell, and all those things are really measurable. And what that means, measurable means in extended enterprise, is if you have a group that takes the training and a group that doesn't take the training, you can see, do they sell more or do they sell less? Are their average sales larger or smaller? Are customers happier or less happy after taking that training? And it doesn't take a big mental leap to realize that they're a lot happier and the metrics go up when people are better educated. And so now extended enterprise training is a profit tool, and it's something to improve as a competitive advantage in an organization versus just compliance training. And so it's very exciting. So Corey, in your business of running and managing a whole team of sales, what are you seeing? Are you seeing more large scale LMS implementations? Are you seeing more like extended enterprise, large scale employee, or are you seeing more extended enterprise coming through your shop? Is there trends that you can share?
Yeah, John, fantastic 5 trends here, and I can validate all of them. Every day I'm on the front line walking people through these buying decisions, right, and trying to help them make the best decision, whether it's Docebo or another LMS, based on their needs. And I can verify that number one, right, the LMS is dead. Basically you're saying, right, no, the LMS isn't dead, it's still alive and well. I can verify that, right, the LMS is alive and well, but the way people view the LMS, that old legacy LMS, that is for sure dead. People are looking for, as you're calling it, more agile, something that resembles social media, something that can be deployed quickly and easily across the cloud, not just to internal employees, but to customers and partners. And so that traditional, bulky, clunky, miserable legacy LMS that a lot of us immediately think to when we thought of learning management and online learning, that image is completely dead and dying, and what we're seeing is kind of that next wave of LMS where it's engaging, it's fun to use, there's gamification, and it can be deployed quickly across different business units and to both internal and external users. And so with that trend, since LMSs now are in the cloud, they're easier to deploy, they're more cost effective and value based than the old systems. We're actually seeing people replace their LMSs at a much higher clip. Actually last year, 44% of companies that were surveyed said they were actively considering replacing their current LMS, which was up 16% from 2015. So this means those people that are in those old bulky legacy contracts are now starting to get the traction to switch, and people that may have gotten into a bad relationship with a cloud-based LMS have the ability now to, every 1 to 3 years, say, you know what, I'm going to go out and test the market and see if I can't find something better that meets my needs. So yeah, John, I can validate from being kind of on the front line here that everything you're trending with is what we see on a daily basis.
Wow, good. Sounds like a good time to be an LMS selection consultant with all those changes coming up. All right, here's another survey. Let me get this one queued up as you introduce it.
Yep, so this is which of the below best describes your organization's training focus? I'll go ahead and launch that poll. And so we've got here employees. Are you focused on internal training? Customers, channel partners, which could be franchises, volunteers, indirect channel, students, or the general public, so kind of a B2C play there. And again, at Docebo, it's incredible. We see all of these different focuses across the board here. So excited to see the mix that we have here today.
Well, I just love to see the 29% here. We'll go ahead and close this out and share the results. But look at that, 29% customers, and that's exactly what I'm seeing out in the industry right now, where 2 years ago, even 3 years ago, only the most progressive organizations were really out training their customers, and now it is just catching on like fire. It is especially for software companies or for manufacturing companies or medical device, really anything where it's technical to help your customers use it. One, to learn how to use it initially, but then actually having it integrated into the app or into the application so that they can get that performance support and throughout time on their products. Are you seeing a lot of customer activities or customer learning activities come in, Corey?
Absolutely. Actually, 60% of our customers use Docebo, if not exclusively for customers, in a hybrid function where they train both internal and external from the platform. So it does make up the majority of the conversations that we have here on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's great to see. All right, let's jump to this next one real quick. So we're saying LMS isn't dead. It's thriving. There's all these LMS companies. So how's that translate to your budgets? Everybody's aware of their budget internally here. Of do they have more LMSs, more content, more on learning technology? Are you spending more or less in
Yeah.
your organization? Uh,
I'm excited to see that about 37%, 40% are saying they're anticipating to grow their budget. So that's good.
Yeah, no, growing's great. That shows that the market's growing. Growing's continuing to win here at 40%. We'll close this out and share it out so you can see. 40% grown or 41, 37% staying the same. You can't argue with that. Only 2% shrinking. Um, I don't know how you would shrink your learning budget as the economy is expanding, and I guess that's what is reflected here. And don't know, fair enough. If you don't have to worry about budgets, I wouldn't worry about it either. For sure. For sure. So as I continue to review the LMSs, so when I left the enterprise market place 4 years ago and founded Talent to Learning, I spent all my time in the corporate space selling large-scale extended enterprise or corporate learning management systems, and I really, for better or worse, ignored the rest of the market. One, I couldn't compete there, so I just didn't take the time to learn it. And so when I got out of Talent to Learning, I started going, one by one on the different learning management companies and seeing what was out there and evaluating the functionality and the use cases. What became apparent to me is that there was a lot of different focuses on the learning management system, or where you could focus learning technology. And the challenge is that even though every LMS, all 700 of them, manage content and learners to some degree, depending on the application, there's a lot of ways, or a lot of different ways, that you need to do that. And to specialize, what happens with specialization in the LMS market is that if you have a whole bunch, or an LMS vendor has a whole bunch of customers, like yourselves with customer learning, for example, that are doing the same thing, then you can harness that horsepower from one, what your customers are requesting from a business and a functionality standpoint, but then also what you're doing from an R&D standpoint, because every dollar that a vendor invests, especially when they have a specialty, goes to the benefit of a lot of customers. And what happens is when you do that, a vendor does that, then they attract more customers that are down that same vein, and the cycle kind of perpetuates itself. And so you get more and more specialized. And so for many years, there was really corporate systems and there was academic systems, for universities and K through 12, and then for all types of large-scale corporate America. But now it's really expanded out, in our opinion, into four broad groups. The academic and corporate are still there, but then there's these new sections of continuing education or commercial training LMSs, so for-profit e-commerce LMSs, and then the whole thriving and probably one of the fastest growing segments is the whole association market, the member-based organizations deploying learning technology for their audiences. And in each one of those categories, there's generalists and there's specialists. So people that'll do any type of corporate, or you could think of it that I know organizations that just focus on healthcare continuing education. Pick one vertical and then just a segment of that vertical, not patient education, not hospital staff education, but continuing education and continuing medical education, for example. And it's like that in academic. It's either higher education, or you're in kindergarten, or you're K through 12. And so there's lots of specializations. But one of the things that I really thought was phenomenal from a cost standpoint, and from a service standpoint, was all the diversity that it's out there from a service standpoint. And so, because of the cloud and the SaaS and multi-tenant nature of LMSs, there's this new concept that's evolved, and Corey, you folks have it, of course, where you can just go without a credit card and start a free trial immediately on your LMS and on many LMSs. That'll allow you to evaluate the functionality, load up your content, see everything that you're going to buy, and test it out for some period of time before you actually buy it. That wasn't around not long ago. That wasn't around at all. And so there's free companies that don't provide any service. And then I found that there's a whole bunch of assisted setup where they'll provide some. They want to help. These vendors want to help get you going, but within reason. They help you set up. They kind of provide reactive support. They might do a little help on integration, or maybe some style sheets or things like that. And they provide this assisted setup. And then there's other vendors that are just are what I call full service, and for every one of their implementations, they don't want to do a free setup, or they won't offer an implementation for $5,000 or $20,000. They want that $50,000 or $75,000, and they provide a lot of value for that, from project management teams and implementation teams, and coming on site, custom integrations with different systems, and doing a lot with data migration and historical data migration from existing LMSs, and helping transfer into that. And then also things like content development and mobile learning development, marketing communications, all kinds of services that full service providers offer that are not just LMS or learning services, but really those complementary services, so that they're providing a solution all the way to the right-hand side of the system integrators, organizations like Accenture or RapidLD that are deploying for the organizations, and kind of acting as an intermediary between the buying customer and the vendor, to handle all technical and professional services, even do things like managed outsourcing. So the reason this is important, that there's a range of these professional services, is for buyers, is if you don't need any services, you're a self-startup, or you're a blogger and you want to start selling your content, you can find vendors that are on the left-hand side of this screen. And if you are a global multinational corporation with a few thousand franchises, well, then you're going to be on the right-hand side of the screen. But the nice thing is that everybody has somewhere to go, and different vendors specialize in each one of these groups. And so what that's all leading to is that there is, and just as Corey said, that with 44%, it's time for a change of vendor direction, and that's what we're seeing. And the reason that we're seeing it is not just because I joke that it's good to be an LMS selection consultant. It's because organizations are paying too much, and if you're paying too much for your platform, then the bucket of money is only so big. There's only 41% of organizations that we just saw here on the call today have expanded LMS budgets, or expanded budgets for learning technology going into this year. But most people either have the same, or they don't know, but they have that same steady budget. So if you have whatever that number is, if you have $100,000 a year to contribute to learning technology, and you're spending 95 of that on the platform, then you really don't have a lot of elbow room to make any impact on your organization. So if you bought your LMS before the age of the cloud, you're probably paying too much. If you own one of those talent management, learning management systems, and you're just using the LMS function and not any of the performance or any of those other modules, you're paying too much. That's the thing about GoToMeeting, is the thing is always right in your way. The panel here. If you are in the process of activating and deactivating licenses to stay under a license cap, and I run into this every single day. I hear people, just yesterday I heard somebody saying about sharing logins so that they didn't have to count against that cap. If you're in the process of doing that, you're paying too much. If you haven't upgraded in a few years, you're paying too much in my estimation. And so all of those things of just not paying too much is what's leading to this change. So the cloud's available. It's lowered the barrier of entry. There's now 700 vendors. There's lots of specialists, and chances are you're paying too much. That's kind of like the perfect storm for looking for a new learning management system. And why should you do it? Well, what if we go back to that example and your budget is 100, and you now find an LMS that you're only paying $50,000 a year, and you just got rid of a whole bunch of technical headaches, and you upgraded to something that looks like Facebook as opposed to some LMS-y looking database, and you're paying half as much, that you can apply all that money to actually making a difference in your business. And that's why organizations are switching now. Okay, so some tips. Let's look at these.
This is exciting.
This is exciting. All right, let's go real quick before we do that. Let's take look. Put my old man glasses on real quick and just answer a couple questions that we've been getting from the crowd. All right. So what about open sources LMSs? They're in there. So in every one of those 4 categories, there's open source LMS. I should have prefaced by saying that I said there's 4 broad groups. I could say there's 24 broad groups. I had to stop somewhere because depending on how you slice it up, there's a lot of ways to define this. But open source LMSs are just a type of technology that fit inside of there. Does Docebo serve the federal market? Yes, they do. Thoughts about open source LMSs? If they meet your need, then they're qualified for the requirements, then including them in your evaluation process, I think is certainly a valid idea. Whether open source is better or worse than commercial LMSs, I think if you lined a few hundred people up on either side of that question, it would be pretty non-decisive on what the answer is. Director of Learning.
I got an interesting question here. It looks like it says, how about LMS and social media? John, have you seen an uptick there in your conversations around social and LMS?
Yeah, absolutely. So social learning's been around for a long time, but it wasn't until social media came onto the stage that it's finally went mainstream in learning management systems. And so people are used to collaborating online. Everybody's checking Facebook multiple times a day. I'm on LinkedIn multiple times a day. Nobody uses Google Plus, but there's different places that you go to every day, and it's easy to fall into the habit of and the understanding of the paradigm of walls and of friends and connections and sharing and liking and commenting and collecting source and feedback, and all those things happen in our regular life, and we're learning whether we like it or not just by the nature of that. And so because that whole paradigm shift in the population at large has occurred, that's now rolled its way in a practical way into learning management systems. And I still think with employees, it's a step behind, but with member-based organizations or customers or channel partners, there's so much sharing that's going on to the betterment of the organization that I really feel it's a mandatory, where just a few short years ago I thought it was nice to have. What are you seeing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean we've really grown our product in that direction because we believe 100% in social. It's the way that people want to learn. When we talk about millennials and how they're going to be dominating the workforce, when they learn, they go on YouTube. They learn from their friends. If you look at recent trust surveys that are out there, people actually now consider peers as credible as an expert as the CEO of their company. So if you don't have a way for your organization to spread peer-to-peer knowledge, you may not be spreading that knowledge in the way that your employees or your customers and your partners want to receive it. So it's 100% what we're seeing here on the front lines as well every day.
Great. That's exciting. That's exciting to see social learning really. It's been something that the instructional designer in me and any instructional designer is, just makes your heart leap for decades now. The possibilities of it, and it's nice to see the reality and the technology keep up. So I just look at the clock, and
Yep.
Believe it or not, Corey, you and I are getting long-winded, so we'll tighten this up here and get moving. But good discussion. So tip number one in the Insider's Guide is it's easy to get stuck. There's a lot of things working against you from replacing your LMS standpoint. You may not have internal support. Politically, somebody may have bought the system that, even if it's a wrong system years ago, that person is politically still in charge or influential. And so it's hard to get. There's always the perceived hassle. That's what everybody, even if they think conceptually, like, all right, I could save some money, but man, how hard is it going to be to get this new system and communicate that to my users and get my content off? And so, the naysayers will talk about the hassle. There's the perennial favorite of lamenting sunk costs. So, we spent $1 million, 7 figures on this system over the last 5 years. We just cannot, get rid of it. And I think that's a flawed thought. If you can replace that system with something that meets your needs and exceeds your needs for less cost, and you can do that, then the sunk cost is not relevant, in my opinion. There's also lack of perceived value. Oh, all LMSs are the same. What's the difference? You go from one database looking LMS to another, and that was a pretty valid thought process a decade ago, but not anymore, because they're not all the same. And the specialist LMSs are actually going to help you change your business. So that's something that didn't exist ever before. And so all these different things, and the magical case of evaporating budget. This one is, we'll get to it a little bit, but that's you think you have the money, and all of a sudden it goes away at the very end, where you don't actually have the budget lined up like you thought when you started the process of replacing. But that's more of understanding how to get budget, but it is a way to get the LMS project stuck. So first advice, stick-to-itiveness. It's not a short process. It's a long process to replace your LMS. You just can't start it today and say, all right, we'll have everybody on board and we're gonna get this done by next month. And I get a lot of calls, as an LMS selection consultant. They say, I'll hear, okay, we want to be live on our new system by like June 30th, and I'll look at the calendar. It's February. Do you have budget? Do you have qualified vendors? Do you have your requirements defined? Do you know how you're using the system right now and how you're paying? Have you analyzed your current costs? And a lot of these questions have no's behind them because you haven't thought through that process. And so what I try to counsel my clients on is that you have to think of LMS selection really in two broad phases that generally goes across 2 fiscal years. In the first fiscal year, it's about getting budget approval. At the end of the day, you can do a lot of work on LMS selection and a lot of work on reviewing vendors and solutions and not be able to pull the trigger and actually buy anything. And so smart buyers and ones that are successful realize that it's imperative to lock in the budget and lock in the political support first, and then go through a formal selection period as a second stage. It's typically in the next year. And by trying to condense all these things into 1, 2, or 3 month process, inevitably leads you to mistakes of evaluating the wrong vendors, incorrect vendors, or cutting your evaluation process short, or spending a lot of time looking at vendors at a very high level and not enough time to actually dig into the solutions that can meet your needs. So smart buyers go for that budget approval first. They get the political support, they understand their current contract, and can they even get out of it? What are their training needs and audiences? We'll talk about defining requirements in a second. They do their research, not while they have. It's not the time to do your research when it's time for the RFP. It's well before that of qualifying vendors and find out who you should include in your process. You should be sharing your requirements with these vendors and talking about how they would approach it from a solution standpoint, as you're approaching the budget phase, and so that by the time you do get budget approval, and that typically comes in December or January or February of the year where you finally get the nod, then you have everything ready. You have your requirements, you have your proposal written, you have the vendors that you want to evaluate a short list, and you're all ready to go into a scientific and valuable comparison to make sure that you buy the best solution for your company. And so the second part is really where you write the RFP, you release that to the qualified vendors, you go through the use case demonstrations, you get your offers, and select your partner. The circle, this phase, this is where the rubber meets the road. If you're good at this, you're going to find a good solution. If you skimp on, this is like exercise, this side of the equation. If you don't like exercise, then every time you go out jogging, it's terrible. That's how it is here on LMS selection. The right side, is all the excitement, but the left side is how you're not going to spend too much and that you're evaluating. And so you got to get good on the left-hand side and find the resources to research, because really, preparation is power. There's 700 LMS vendors out there. It is not the LMS vendor's responsibility to educate you as a buyer. I repeat that. It's not the LMS vendor's responsibility to educate you. Now, certainly good salespeople are going to educate you and try to educate you, but it's not their responsibility, because it's not their responsibility to bring up their own holes or functionality gaps or things that they don't think they do great. It's your responsibility as a buyer to identify what you need and to make sure that you're evaluating vendors apples to apples. And with 700 different vendors out there, with 700 different focuses and different license models and pricing and functionality and technical capabilities and levels of professional service, it's up to you as the buyer to spend that time wisely in preparation, because that'll provide the negotiation advantage. That'll provide the power of an informed purchase. And an informed purchase will always lead to LMS success. Coming in, not understanding the industry, not understanding the competition or your requirements or the current state is like a surefire way of finding an LMS that doesn't meet your needs. See, on the bottom here of a lot of these slides, I've wrote blog posts that deal specifically with this topic. After the webinar today, when we send the follow-up, we'll send the links along to these, but we have specifics on what you can do to prepare for that budget as you're waiting for budget. And a lot of times, the last point on that budget, a lot of times the budget might not even come when you want, believe it or not. Most times it doesn't come when you want. And so that preparation is something that you might have to do 2 or 3 years sometimes before you actually achieve the funds or the approval for funds to move with an LMS selection. That's why it's so important to get that research done and then keep it up to date over the years, because the LMS project in most organizations will be competing against other projects, and the owners of those other projects, which may be in or out of training, each think that their project is just as important as your LMS project. And so as someone that's trying to replace their LMS as an administrator or as a budget owner, it's really important to focus on achieving that budget. So the fourth tip is define your requirements like a pro. And so most typically, and Corey probably runs into this all the time, when organizations define their requirements, they find a spreadsheet online, and that spreadsheet has 1,001 requirements on it, which is every conceivable possible requirement that's ever been defined in the history of LMSs. 699 of those requirements are not relevant. They're asking things about client-server capabilities, and they've been used and reused and copied and pasted, down through time, and you have this big thing, and in one of the columns in those 1,001 requirements, so I'm sure you've seen, is it mandatory or is it optional? In my experience, out of those 1,001 requirements, 3 or 4 tend to be optional, and the other 1,000 are mandatory requirements, whether they are mandatory or not. And so that's a process I think a lot of organizations go through of, these are our requirements. And what happens is that's just not, it doesn't make any sense. It's not relevant. It's not even helpful to have that list of requirements, because what you end up getting, as you'll see, is just too much. If you can do everything on a requirements list, then you have to be a big, bulky LMS. And so it's better to start with your use cases. How are you going to use the learning management system? Who are the audiences? What do you want them to do? And actually write that out. It has nothing to do with an Excel spreadsheet. This happens in Word. What are my customers? Are they my employees? Are all my employees the same, or do I have different types of employees? How are they going to find the system? What do I want them to do? What types of training are they supposed to take? Are they buying training? Where these users come from? How do they log on? How do they know what their username and passwords are? These are the things that organizations need to talk about amongst themselves to define exactly how they're going to use and why they're going to use the learning management system and to what end and how they're going to measure if they're successful on any of that. That's all in the use case block. And believe it or not, what I found is that most organizations skip that use case block. So instead of orienting the potential vendor as closely as you can on the business situation, organizations just give them that spreadsheet of features. And features mean nothing. It's the features working together in concert to achieve your use cases that really matter. So if you take the time to do your use cases and start there, what you'll find is that you don't have 1,001 requirements. You might have 50 requirements. And now that 50 requirements is what you use as a template to qualify and find vendors. But it's not just use cases, because as we talked about, professional services, there's a range. Do we just want to self-set up, or are we going to need those high-level full service or integration partners? From a technical standpoint, do we want to, for some reason, host this behind our own firewall, or do we want it in the cloud? Is this going to go in a federal deployment where we need certification, authorization type certificates, or can it just be in the Amazon cloud, for example? And so from a technical standpoint, do we need integrations, and what do we need those integrations to do, and what systems does our LMS need to talk to? Do we have single sign-on? Do we have an ERP system? Do we have CRM or HRIS? But you have to write all that out and define that, because vendors will say, sure, we can do integrations. But if you can say, do you have an integration to Salesforce, and is it two-way, and does it share this type of data? If they have to answer that question, then you have a lot better chance of finding qualified vendors than if you say, just can you do something versus this is what we really need. And then finally, from a business standpoint of, how are you using the application today? What are your usage patterns? How much are you using, so that you can get to actual apples to apples costs. And so defining your requirements like a pro is probably the most important of all these 10 tips, because if you take the time to do this, and it's not glamorous and it's not necessarily easy, but it is the critical step to use as a template to find those specialists. And if you don't do this, then inevitably you just find generalists, and going from a generalist to a generalist is kind of a fruitless task from an LMS standpoint. So let's jump here and take another survey.
Here we go. So the survey is, how many LMS vendors should you qualify?
Yeah, how many is too many? I mean, should we? How about, Corey? What was the most you ever heard? What a customer, a potential customer, comes to you and says, "You're in." I think my number is 24.
That's what I was going to say. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 or 30 that they had started looking at. I just wondered, how much time had you spent, just gathering this. And the other funny piece was talking to some, people that are evaluating LMSs and say, all right, I've got my short list narrowed down to 10, and thinking, my God, what was your big list?
That's a long short list.
Yeah, it's a long short list.
All right. So what do we have here we'll close this out and share these results, but from the audience here, 40% say 3, 55% say 5, and some even say 10, and we scared off anybody that was thinking about 20 by poking fun. Yeah, we were poking fun, so we probably influenced that. But I don't think there's a right answer here, but what I do know is that if you are looking at qualified vendors, so meaning that you've went through the process, hold on. Oop, I gotta hide that. If you were looking at qualified vendors, and what that means is that you have 3 or 4 or 5 that can meet the functional, the technical, the support, those business and professional service requirements, then 3 or 4 or 5 is probably ample. If you don't take the time to define your requirements and you have to look at a much, much broader cross section and try to hope that you find the responsible vendors in there that would align. And that's a lot tougher said than done. But 3 to 4 to 5 is reasonable. But here we go. How much does it cost to qualify a vendor? So look at that. 42% say zero. Man, you're going to love my next two slides because I completely disagree. The 16%, we'll close this out here as I look at the clock again. Goodness. All right, share. So what you see here is a lot of folks think, a third of us think it's zero. Add that to the 17, I think it's only $100. So what's that? 50% think it's $100 or less. 31% think it's the 2,000 or 1,000, and a few over 10,000. Well, here's what it is. Here's what it is, in my opinion. It's expensive to qualify vendors. So what vendors mean, as I said, they're the ones that meet your requirement. It's not sending it to 50 vendors and requesting information. That's a waste of time for everybody, without a doubt. But qualifying vendors is expensive. That's why you need to do it in those two phases that I mentioned before. You got to do this when you're not under the gun from a timing standpoint, because look at this. So if I want to, I send an email out to my community and I say, who should I be talking to from an LMS? And they say, okay, you should be talking to the Chabo. And I say, all right. So I go to the website. I research the site. I read all the stuff. I fill out the form. I wait a couple of days, maybe instantaneously with Docebo here. You get a salesperson call, you schedule that. You get on. They want to do the vendor's going to want to do a discovery call, understand what your business challenge is, how big the opportunity is, the things that they need to learn, about the opportunity. After each one of those discovery calls, you got to talk amongst your team to say, you think these guys are going to work? Did they get it? It's just the right, are we barking up the wrong tree type of thing? And then you got to schedule logistics for the vendor demonstration, because you have your broader team. You got a couple people from IT, the person from customer service. You need your boss in there. There's the random one or two people that you don't even know that need to be a part of that selection team. And they put in an hour and a half, and then you have to debrief. And if you just go through those steps with one vendor, it's really easy to spend, from an organizational standpoint, 16 hours of productivity at a loaded rate of that 100 or $150 an hour, depending on your team, and you're spending $1,600, $2,400 a vendor, and that process doesn't happen in a day. It takes a week at best, 2-3 weeks. If there's trade shows and other sales calls, and it's easy to spend a few weeks. So do you do this with one vendor? Do you do this with 24 vendors? You can see how time would run out in a hurry. So organizations that don't take that two-step license or that two-step approach very quickly run out of time as they go through that vendor qualification process. And so it's a waste of money to evaluate vendors, or it costs money to evaluate vendors. So you want to go about it very strategically with all your information and ducks in a row to try to minimize that cost and time. Number 6, we got to align the license models. And what that means is that there's a lot of different license models you can pay. And what's a license model? It means how a user or how a vendor charges for usage of their LMS. And you would think that that would be standard, but it's not. You can charge by registration. You can charge by people logging onto the system. You can charge by selling of courses, or you could just say they're an employee and so you have a license. You could charge by how many products are in the content library. You could charge by location. Each location has to pay a fee. And so with 700 vendors, there's no common way to count usage. And so depending on the type of usage that you have, one model might be more advantageous. So if you have unknown users because you're in e-commerce, you don't want a named user type model. Those vendors won't align right. So it's really important to align your usage with how the vendor counts. And misalignment is one of the easiest ways to spend way too much extra money. Just wrote a blog post about this a couple days ago, or maybe last week, that outlines what each one of these are and how they're good. So what you'll find is that for each vendor, it's important to do something like this. When you get their pricing, it's never going to look like this, but you want to start manipulating it into a price like this. So if there is 10,000 users and they count by users per year, what's that look like every year? What's the cost for that one-time implementation? Are there any additional annual costs? Is there a domain fee or a hosting fee or this fee? And you do that for each vendor. And what you'll find is that, it doesn't matter if it's $25 a user or $20 a user. What matters is the bottom right-hand column here, the cell of once you add it all up. So we'll have to skip that survey as we're running here. Next week, or in 2 weeks, I think, Docebo's here having another webinar where they're going to dig specifically into the RFP process. And so I encourage you to register for that as a follow-up to this, not with me, but with Docebo here providing some nice thought leadership. And the 8th tip is to drive the demo. So if you ask a vendor to demonstrate the solution, they're going to demonstrate it in the way that they want to demonstrate it. So they're going to show it in the way that they've practiced, that is the smoothest, slickest way, ideally, that they would actually show the application. And that's great, just to get an understanding of what a solution can do. But if you've taken the time to define your requirements and define your use cases and those functional requirements out of a result of those use cases, you want to see the demonstration through that lens so that everybody on your team, from the most experienced to the most inexperienced, can see the solution working through the lens of your actual problem. And if you make all vendors do that and follow a similar agenda of stating their understanding of the business need and what you're trying to achieve and how their solution aligns and is going to allow you to achieve that as a buyer, and here it is working in action, and here it is on those technical and support and business items that we identified. If you do that from a demo standpoint, what you'll be able to do is make a viable comparison, and that's really that's really what's critical. In the end, though, if you do just use those thousands and thousands of requirements or 1,001 requirements, what you get is you overbuy, because what will happen is that the only vendors that can do everything are the most expensive vendors, and instead of just getting a hammer for the nail that you need to hit, you end up buying this big sledgehammer. And so visually, we'll put it together a la Saturday Night Live. You want a house on the corner, this is what you should go search for. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, a nice little picket fence. But if you use the big spreadsheet and you say you want 1,001 requirements, you're buying a Mar-a-Lago looking thing and having absolutely no money for anything else, because you'll be completely house poor, or in this case, LMS poor. And so I just wanted to show you real quickly here that this is what I see every day. I talk about coming to this realization of that you're spending too much. Here's something that I see typically: 5,000 learners, U.S. based. It's a second LMS, so you'll have to do a historical data migration. There's typical online learning management, so nothing crazy here, just standard use cases for employee learning management system. If they bought a talent management LMS, they could spend $50,000 to set that up, and $125,000 a year if it's just like $25 a user a year. But what happens is that customer is probably going to only use about 20 or 25% of the LMS, because they're only using a portion for their use cases, but they have to pay for all of it, essentially. And so a 3-year cost on something like that might be $425,000. But if you go to a cloud or a specialist LMS and you find somebody that can meet your exact requirements, and as a customer, you'd be a much bigger fish in that smaller pond, so you'd be more important, and that you probably use 75% if you go to a specialist of their LMS versus 25%, and more importantly, 75% of their other customers are using the same feature sets as you. And what you'll find is that it's typically about a 50% cost reduction on half the cost to set up, and half or even a third of the cost per year on a license standpoint. And so it's really easy to come to a place where you're saving $250,000 a year just on a 5,000 user system, and that's not out of bounds. So review the fine print of the contract when you do get the contracts, because all through the sales process you'll hear one thing, but when you actually see it written in the contract, you got to look at these things: the length of the contract, cost determination, making sure that you double check and triple check how you're going to be charged for uses of that system and what that costs, especially if you use more than you're intending. And then finally, always compare vendors equally. So I showed you before how to get it into this format, but what you want to do is as you start lining up these different vendors, start comparing, what's the one-time setup based on all your requirements and your integration? What's it look like for year one? What's it look like for year three? And when you add all that up, that'll give you really a nice comparison of where you need to be to select. So if you take the time to define your requirements, then you identify qualified vendors, and then you do apples to apples price comparison, then you basically have a 3-3 shot of finding a vendor that's going to meet your needs at a reasonable price range. And that's the lesson here. So the LMS is stronger than ever. There's a specialty. There's an LMS for you that's out there, and it's just important to do your homework to find it. And if you do your homework, you'll be successful, like in most things in life. So that's what we have here for you today. Corey, sorry I cut you out there as we race towards the end. Any questions or final comments here based on those last slides?
Yeah, and I saw there were lots of really good questions and comments. I promise we will get back to all of those. We'll respond to you individually in email. Also, we will be making this slide deck available, so you'll be able to click all of the links, as well as we will post a recording of this webinar. If you have any other specific questions, again, feel free to reach out to either John or myself. Both of our email addresses are on the screen right now. And since we want to be respectful of everybody's time, I don't think we'll be going through any questions right now. But again, we'll be responding to everybody, and any other questions, feel free to reach out to both of us. But I want to thank everyone so much for your time, for spending about an hour here with me and John. Really enjoyed it, John. I feel like I took away some key thoughts here for myself, so I really appreciate that. I hope everyone else feels the same way. So again, thanks everyone.
Excellent, excellent. All right, well, thanks, Corey. Thanks, audience here, for investing that full hour. Really appreciate that, and it's great to be invited here today, Corey. So thank you. Look forward to doing the next one with you at some point in the future. All right, we'll be following up, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.